Hello, welcome to the module INV3703, derivatives. It's part of the Unisa modules in the College of Investments and Finance, and it's a sister module to INV 3701 and 3702. Now, this module is a bit, but not very challenging, but it is a bit challenging because it gets very mathematical, and some of the concepts which are covered in this module are things you will be seeing for the first time. In terms of the learning units it only has 5 learning units, which aren't a lot of learning units, but those learning units come with a lot of information. However, the nice thing about this module is that the types of questions you come across in these learning units, the questions don't change a lot. But the most important thing about this module is, number one, you need to know your theory behind the concepts. And number two, you need to be very, and I emphasize very, you need to be very good with your calculator. You need to be good with calculations. You shouldn't be someone who tends to make mistakes when it comes to basic calculations, right? If you get that right, you should be fine. So study unit 1 is called Derivatives and Instruments. It's just an introduction to derivatives. Study unit 2 is titled Forward Markets and Contracts. A forward contract is a special type of derivative, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the different types of derivatives. Study unit 3 is Future Markets and Contracts, which is also a special kind of derivative contract. And lastly, study unit 4 is Option Markets and Contracts. And lastly, study unit 5 is swaps. Yeah, swap markets and contracts. So I emphasize again, the module is very mathematical and it's got a lot of theory behind it. So you would need to spend a sufficient amount of time on this module, practicing a lot of questions. The key to this module is to practice and practice and practice. You need to be really good with your calculator. So the prescribed textbook is part of the textbook for the CFA program. And for this module, you just focus on chapters 1 up to chapter 5, right? That's what this module focuses on. You don't have to know all the content from chapter 1 up to chapter 5, but there are some key elements of these chapters that you need to know, and I'll take you through what you need to know, right? So that's the first part. And also you're going to notice that as I go through this module, I will be referring to some material from a module called RSK 4805. RSK 4805 is a post-grad module which covers some of the concepts in analysis of derivatives. But the curriculum for RSK 4805 has recently changed. They no longer use the same textbook that we'll be using. But previously, when I prepared these notes, these two modules, INV3703 and RSK 4805, they used to go hand in hand. They overlapped for the first chapters, and then RSK 4805 continued going forward. So when I prepared these notes that I'll be using in these classes, I had integrated both these groups, right? Because they cover the same concepts in the first 5 chapters. So don't be surprised when I look at some questions for practice from RSK 4805, and at other times I look at questions from INV 3703, because these two modules overlap. So in this class, I'm going to take you through chapter 1 or study unit 1, which is an introduction to this module, an introduction to what derivatives are all about, right? With regards to forwards, I don't think I'll be able to cover any part on forwards in this particular class, but I will most likely look at forwards in the class that will come afterwards, maybe the second class. So in this class, I'm just going to look at study unit 1. I'm going to introduce you to derivatives, what derivatives are, what they involve, and all the theory and the important concepts behind derivatives. Okay. So as I keep saying, it's a module that can be a bit challenging, but if you're comfortable with your theory and you do a lot of calculations, like you practice a lot, maybe set aside a certain amount of time each day or every 2 days, maybe just 30 minutes just to practice and get familiar with your calculator. If you can do that, you should be fine. The most important thing about RSK 4805 is to be comfortable with your scientific calculator. Okay, so now let's get to it. Chapter 1 is derivatives, markets and instruments, and I will introduce you to derivatives. Okay. So the first thing you need to note, you actually need to understand what we mean when we talk about a derivative, like what the name actually means. What is a derivative, right? And then you also have to understand the different types of derivatives. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to take you through some basic terminology. I'm going to take you through some words that we are going to be using when we talk about derivatives. And then after taking you through this basic terminology, like words, basic words we use when we talk about derivatives, I'll then take you through the different types of derivatives. And then once I'm done with that, we'll look at some questions from a past exam paper. And I would also advise you to look at questions at the back of the analysis of derivatives book on study unit 1. If you're comfortable with that, then you can tick study unit 1 is being done with regards to your preparation for the exams. Okay. So this is how we derive a derivative. This is a contract. It's a special type of contract that derives, meaning that gets its value from the price of another asset. Okay. So let me just repeat that. We define a derivative as follows. A derivative is a contract. So this is a contract. It's a contract that gets its value, right, from the price of another asset. And the other asset from which a derivative gets its value from is known as the underlying asset. So this definition that I've given you is very technical. Like if you don't have a background in derivatives, it's a definition that's easy to say and easy to write down, but it's a bit difficult to understand because we're just told that a derivative is a contract that gets its value from the price of another underlying asset, but it's a bit difficult to really understand what that means, right? So let's actually look at some examples and other terminology, and then we'll come back to this definition and what it's saying, right? So you'll notice that in this definition of a derivative, I have used some words that you might not be familiar with. I've used the word underlying asset, right? And I've used the word underlying asset. So let's just talk about what an underlying asset is and what a spot price is. And then after that, hopefully you'll be able to understand what we mean when we say that a derivative is a contract that gets its value from the price of another asset, right? So underlying asset and spot price, these are two important terminologies that you need to understand before we explain this definition. Right, so the price of any asset like a share or a bond, the price of or gold or anything, the price of any asset today in the regular market is known as the spot price. So let's say you want to buy shares on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, or let's say you want to sell a bond on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in the bond market. The price you can sell the bond at, or the price you can sell the share at, or buy it and so forth, is known as the spot price. That's the price of that asset today in the regular market. So it's the price individuals are prepared to pay for an asset and the price individuals are prepared to sell an asset at. We call that the spot price. And it's important to understand that in the context of derivatives, right? So this spot price, this is the price you pay for any asset immediately. So when we talk about the spot price, we are talking about the price that you pay for any asset immediately when you buy the asset, or the price you sell an asset for when you sell the asset. So there's a simple example here illustrating what we mean by the spot price. So suppose there's an asset that you wish to buy 3 months from now. Suppose you wish to buy shares in a certain company 3 months from now. And let's say that these are shares in a bank, right? So assume this asset is shares in a bank, is shares in ABC Bank, and the shares are currently selling for 150 Rand, okay? So let's say you wish to buy shares in ABC Bank 3 months from now, and those shares are currently selling for 150 Rand today. That 150 Rand, the price that the shares are currently selling for today, is known as the spot price, right? And then the ABC Bank shares, the shares that you actually wish to buy, are known as the underlying asset, okay? So to be able to buy these 3 shares in 3 months' time, you can enter into what we call a derivative contract, which will guarantee the price which you'll pay for the shares in 3 months, okay? So this is where the name derivative comes from, right? This is where the name derivative comes from. A derivative is simply a contract that guarantees the price at which you can buy or sell a share at sometime in the future. That's the idea behind a derivative. So there might be an asset in the market that's currently selling at a certain spot price, right? But you might not want to buy that asset today. You might want to buy that asset in the future, right? And we call that asset the underlying asset. So to make sure that the price you buy that asset for in the future is not too high, right? You can enter into a derivative contract, a contract which will guarantee the price at which you can buy the asset for from someone at an agreed price. Likewise, if you wanted to sell the asset 3 months from now, and you're afraid that the price of the asset is going to go down, right? Meaning you would have to sell it at a lower price in the future. You can enter into a derivative contract with someone which will guarantee the price at which you can sell that asset to that person 3 months from now, or 6 months, whatever the duration is. It will depend with the contract. Okay, so that's the idea behind how a derivative contract works. So the benefit of the derivative contract, which is the value, the benefit of the derivative contract, which is the value of the derivative contract, right, will actually depend on what the price of the underlying asset is at the time you want to sell it. If you are the party who's selling the asset in the derivative contract, or the price at which you'll buy it if you're the party who's buying in the derivative contract. So how valuable the contract is to you will be based on what the price of the underlying asset is at expiry. That's why we call it a derivative contract. But let me illustrate this to you through an example. Let me just see. Yeah. Okay. So this is an example just illustrating how a derivative contract could actually be beneficial through a simple example here. The example says, suppose a derivatives dealer agrees to sell shares to you for 155 Rand in 3 months, right? So let's say you wish to buy shares in 3 months, but you're afraid that at the time you want to buy these shares in 3 months, you are afraid that the price of these shares in 3 months will be too high. So let's say you approach a derivatives dealer and the dealer agrees that 3 months from now, I will sell these shares to you for 155 Rand. Let's say they are shares in a certain company. So let's say today the shares are maybe selling for 150 Rand. And you're afraid that when you want to buy the shares might be 200 Rand. So the derivatives dealer might agree to sell these shares to you for 155 Rand. You can calculate a price you agree on. And then this price you agree on, it's a guaranteed price. So irregardless of what the price is going to be to everyone else in the market, the dealer is going to sell these shares to you at an agreed price that you calculate today, right? So this price that you will pay in 3 months, it's not the spot price. It's not the price of the asset today, right? It's actually a price that you're going to pay sometime in the future. And that price that you're going to pay sometime in the future, or you're going to sell it, if you're the selling party, we call that price the exercise or the strike price. So this 155 Rand is called the exercise or the strike price, right? So the price that you sell or buy an asset at today, right, on the exchange or anywhere else is called the spot price. Whereas the price that you sell or buy a share at in the future, the price you agree with a derivatives dealer or with other parties who you enter into a derivatives contract with, the price that you agree to buy or sell it in the future is known as the exercise price or the strike price. So whenever you read a derivatives question, always make sure you understand that when we say spot price, we're talking about the price of an asset today in the market today. And when we talk about an exercise price or a strike price, we're talking about the price of the asset, the price that we agree to buy or sell the asset at sometime in the future, right? So still looking at this example, whereby you agree to sell your shares for 155 Rand in 3 months, assume that after 3 months, the spot price of the ABC shares is 180 Rand, right? Suppose that after 3 months, the actual price, the spot price, meaning the price that people are buying and selling at after 3 months, let's say time has gone by and we are now 3 months into the future. Let's say the price in the market to buy or sell the share at immediately is 180 Rand, right? You can buy these shares, and let's assume you had entered into this derivatives contract to agree to buy at 155 Rand, and then 3 months later, everyone else is buying at 180 Rand. Okay, so you can buy these shares from the dealer at a price of 155 Rand according to the derivatives contract that you entered into. So you entered into a contract that guaranteed the price you're going to pay, whereas everyone else is paying 180 Rand 3 months later in the spot market. So you can buy these shares from the dealer at a price of 155 Rand according to the derivatives contract you entered 3 months ago. The benefit or the value, the gain to you, the benefit, which is the value to you, will be the 180 Rand, which everyone else is paying, minus the 155 Rand, which you get to pay. So what you can do, you can simply buy the shares at 155 Rand in the market. Sorry, you can buy the shares at 155 Rand according to the strike price that you agreed to buy it with the dealer. And then as soon as you buy them, you can then go and sell them in the spot market at 180 Rand, whereby the spot market is the market that everyone else is buying and selling at. And this will give you a profit of 25 Rand. So this will be the value of the derivative contract to you. So it means this benefit that you got of 25 Rand, this value, it came from the actual spot price when you were now exercising your derivative contract. It came from the actual spot price of the underlying asset. So that's why we call this a derivative contract. The benefit you get depends on the price of the underlying asset when it's time to exercise the contract. Okay, right. So I hope it's a bit technical and it's a bit abstract and it can be difficult to understand. But the key idea when you're looking at derivatives is that we have the spot market, right? And we have the derivatives market. These are two different markets, right? The spot market is where people are buying and selling today. It's where people are buying and selling today. Whereas the derivatives market is where people are buying and selling in the future. Okay. People are agreeing to buy and sell today, but they're actually going to buy and sell in the future. Okay. So when we talk about the spot price, we're talking about the price in which people are buying and selling today. Whereas in the derivatives market, this is the market in which people are buying or selling in the future. You can try to read other sources to try to help you to understand this, but I hope I explained it as best as I could with this final example, where I said you could enter into a contract in which you agree to buy shares, meaning a dealer sells shares to you, where you agree to buy shares for 155 Rand in 3 months, right? This example. And then you agree to buy at 155 Rand in 3 months. That 155 Rand might not necessarily be the price at which the cells are selling at in the spot market. This is a price you're going to agree to buy at sometime in the future. So we said we call it an exercise or a strike price. It's a price related to the future, right? It's the price you're going to buy or sell it in the future, right? So after 3 months, you might actually find that the share price ends up being 180 Rand, right? So meaning everyone is buying and selling at 180 Rand. However, you're at a benefit because you agreed to buy at 155 Rand from the dealer, like it was an agreement. So the dealer can then sell the shares to you for 155 Rand. And then as soon as they sell them to you, you can go and sell them for 180 Rand in the market and you can make a profit of 25. Okay, that's just an example. Right. So now you have a basic understanding of derivative contracts and how they work and what they are all about. Now you know what we mean by a strike price or exercise price or a spot price and the benefits of derivatives. It's time for us to actually now look at the different types of derivative contracts. Okay. In the examples we were talking about, we were just saying derivative contracts, but those derivative contracts can actually be divided into different groups, right? They can be divided into different groups. So rather than just saying derivative contracts, we can actually divide these derivatives into different groups, right? So I've drawn a table here just to explain how we can divide derivatives into different groups. Firstly, derivatives can be divided into two distinct groups, right? We can divide derivatives into what we call forward commitments and what we call contingent claims, right? And then these forward commitments can be further divided into exchange traded forward commitments and over-the-counter forward commitments. And then these over-the-counter forward commitments can be divided into forwards and also into swaps. And these exchange traded the forward commitments are known as futures. And then these contingent claims are known as options. So in INV 3703, study unit 2 focuses on forwards, what forwards are and how to do calculations involving forwards. And then study unit 3 focuses on futures, what futures are, how they compare to the other derivatives and how to do calculations involving futures. And then study unit 4 focuses on options, what options are and how to do calculations involving options. And finally, study unit 5 focuses on swaps, what swaps are, and how to do calculations involving swaps. So this diagram that I've just put up on the screen summarizes what the module INV3703 is all about. So let's briefly go through some of these terms like forward commitments, contingent claims. Let's just talk about what all these terms actually mean in relation to derivatives and what we are going to be coming across in this module, right? So firstly, let's talk about what we mean by a forward commitment. You see, we started with the word forward commitment here. And here we say forward commitment. This is a derivative contract in which the parties involved have an obligation, meaning they must. The parties involved have an obligation to buy or sell a given asset on a given date at an agreed price. So we define a forward commitment as follows. This is a derivative contract in which the parties involved in the contract have an obligation to buy or sell a given asset on a given date at an agreed price, right? Then we first define a contingent claim, and then we'll compare these two. Whereas with the contingent claim, also known as an option, this is a derivative contract, right, in which the holder of the contract has a choice. So compare this with a contingent claim, we have a choice, whereas with the forward commitment, we have an obligation. So this is a derivative contract in which the holder of the contract has a choice to buy or sell a given asset on a given date at an agreed price. Okay, so let me briefly explain what we mean by that. Right, so the idea here is that if you enter into a derivative contract, let's say you want to buy or sell an asset, right, in the future, and you want to make sure that the price is set, the price you're going to buy it or sell it is an agreed price between you and another party. If you want to enter into a derivative contract, you can enter into two types. Either you can enter into a forward commitment, which means you'll have an obligation to buy or sell the given asset on a given date at an agreed price. Meaning that if you enter into this contract to buy shares in MTN, for example, okay, let's talk about it this way. Let's say you enter into a forward commitment to buy shares in MTN at 200 Rand each. Maybe 3 months from now. If you enter into a forward commitment, once the 3 months comes, you have to buy the shares for 200 Rand from the party who you agreed to buy from the party you entered into the forward commitment with, right? So even if the price of the share has gone down in the spot market, you will still have to buy at this exercise price, at the price you agreed. So you'll be at a disadvantage. But with the forward commitment, you must do what you said you would do, even if it's a disadvantage to you. Okay. However, alternatively, we have what we call a contingent claim or an option. With an option, you might want to buy shares in MTN 3 months from now, and you might agree to buy those shares at 200 Rand. But the difference between a forward commitment and a contingent claim is that with a contingent claim known as an option, you actually have a choice to buy or sell the given asset on a given date, meaning 3 months from now, you don't have to buy at the strike price. You have a choice, right? If the price of the share in the spot market is favorable for you, then you can exercise your choice. But if it's unfavorable, you can choose not to exercise your choice. Okay. So when do you think it might be favorable for you or unfavorable? So let's say you agreed to buy shares in MTN 3 months from now from 200 Rand. So this is the exercise price. If the price of the MTN shares actually ends up being 300 Rand, right? It will be favorable for you to exercise your option. If it's a contingent claim derivative, it will be favorable for you to exercise your option because you'll be buying at 200 Rand, whereas everyone else is buying at 300 Rand. So you can buy at 200 sell for 100 Rand, make a profit of 100 Rand, whereby sell for 300 Rand and make a profit of 100 Rand, right? So you'll be able to buy for 200, whereas everyone else is buying and selling for 300. So you would exercise your option, your contingent claim, if the shares in MTN in the spot market are higher than the exercise price. So that's when it would be an advantage. But it would be a disadvantage if the price of the shares in MTN go down. Let's say the actual price in the spot market ends up being 150. If the actual price in the spot market ends up being 150, whereas you have a choice to buy for 200, it would be better not to buy, right? Because you would now be buying at a higher price compared to what everyone else in the spot market is buying or selling at. So you would rather then go into the spot market and buy at 150. So that's the difference between a forward commitment and a contingent claim. With a forward commitment, once you agree to buy or sell, you have to do so even if conditions are unfavorable for you. Whereas with a contingent claim known as an option, it's a choice. You have a choice to buy or sell. If the market conditions are favorable for you, you can exercise your contingent claim, your option. But if the market conditions are not favorable for you, you can choose not to exercise your option. Okay, so that's what we mean by contingent claims and forward commitments. So I hope you appreciate that. Okay, so I've explained these two. I've explained what we mean by forward commitments and contingent claims. Now let's talk about what we mean by an exchange traded derivative and an over-the-counter derivative. Okay, so when we talk about exchange traded derivatives, these are derivative contracts which can be bought or sold on an exchange. They are known as futures contracts. Okay, so an exchange traded derivative is a forward commitment, but it's a special type of forward commitment. It's a forward commitment that can be bought or sold on an exchange, right? And these types of forward commitments, which are exchange traded, are known as futures contracts. Whereas with over-the-counter forward commitments, over-the-counter, these are derivative contracts which can be bought and sold privately between two parties. And these types can be separated into forwards and swaps. So let's talk about this distinction just for a moment before I go on too fast. When we talk about forward commitments, there are forward commitments which can be bought or sold on an exchange, right? Meaning that if you want to buy shares or any other asset in the future, right, you can enter into a derivative contract to buy or sell the shares or any other asset anytime in the future through an exchange, like through the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, for example, right? So let's say I want a contract to be able to buy or sell MTN shares sometime in the future, right? I can enter into an exchange traded contract. I can go to the exchange and I can enter into a transaction with the exchange in which the exchange will agree to sell shares to me at an agreed price 3 months from now or a year from now. They will agree to sell those shares to me at the strike price or the exercise price that they will be using in the market on that given moment, right? Or let's say I want to buy the shares. So let's say I want to buy or to sell, I can enter into a contract with an exchange. So the exchange will enter into a derivative contract with me in which we will agree that come sometime in the future, I will buy or sell the shares at an agreed price. Okay, so this transaction occurs with the exchange as the counterparty. And when the exchange is the counterparty, we say that it's a futures contract, right? But then there are also a special type of forward commitment contracts in which we have a private arrangement between two parties, like a dealer and me, and we don't have the exchange. And I go to the dealer and I say to the dealer, I want to buy shares in 3 months. at an agreed price, and then the dealer can enter into the contract with me, and we can agree on the price between us as two private individuals, not through an exchange. Such a forward commitment is known as a forward or a swap. We'll talk about swaps later on, but for now, when we talk about forward commitments, you should think of forward contracts, right? So here I briefly then just talk about these types of contracts, like a futures contract, a forward contract, and a swap. And I define them as follows. A futures contract, this is a standardized exchange traded, meaning the exchange is the counterparty. This is a standardized exchange traded contract to buy or sell a given asset on a given date at an agreed price. So a futures contract is a standardized contract which can be bought or sold on an exchange, right? Involving a given asset on a given date at an agreed price. Whereas a forward contract, right? This is a tailor-made over-the-counter contract. We say it's over the counter because it's a private arrangement to buy or sell a given asset on a given date at an agreed price. So the main difference between a futures contract and a forward contract is that with a futures contract, you're entering into an agreement with the exchange as a counterparty, whereas with the forward contract, you're entering into an agreement with another dealer or a third party as a private arrangement. And that third party being your counterparty, right? You're not going to the exchange, you're making a private agreement. So we're going to look a lot at these futures and forwards and how to actually calculate the strike price that you agree to buy or sell it in the future for a futures contract and a forward contract, and also how to get the values associated with these contracts at different time intervals. And we're also going to look at swaps. And a swap, this is a contract in which two parties agree to exchange cash flows on specified dates. So a swap can be viewed as a series of forward contracts. So we're also going to look at swaps in details. With swaps, you just have you and the dealer, and you agree that after a certain number of months or years, you're going to be swapping certain cash flows. So those certain cash flows can be based on different assets that you agree on. So don't worry too much about that, but we're going to look at it a lot in the later chapters that come. For now, just distinguish between futures and forward contracts, whereby futures are standardized and exchange traded and bought or sold on an exchange, whereas forward contracts are tailor-made and over-the-counter contracts, which are made as a private agreement between two parties. So once we come there, you need to appreciate the actual difference between forwards and futures contracts. And I summarize these differences in this table right here. It's a common exam question to be asked to compare the differences between futures contracts and forward contracts. And like we've said so far, so I've put a minus for the disadvantages of each contract, and then where there's a plus, it's an advantage for each type of contract. So with a futures contract, okay, this is just it's not a disadvantage, it's just a property. Okay, so a futures contract is exchange traded, right? It can be bought or sold on the exchange, whereas a forward contract is over the counter, meaning it's a private arrangement between two parties. Futures contracts have no default risk because the exchange is the counterparty. You can be guaranteed that the exchange will not default on their agreement. When it's time for the exchange to deal with you, they'll deal with you the way they said they would. Whereas with a forward contract, which is a private arrangement, there's an element of default risk. There's always the risk that the third party you're dealing with, might fail to honor their side of the agreement, right? And then with a futures contract is standardized and it cannot be tailored, right? So if you enter into a futures contract, you're entering into a contract in which you can buy or sell an asset that the exchange is okay with, and in the quantities that the exchange is okay with. But this might not always be what you want, right? You might want the date to be tailored to your needs and the quantity of the asset to be tailored to your need, but the exchange doesn't do that. The exchange offers a standardized contract which cannot be tailored. Whereas with a forward contract is easy to tailor. A forward contract can be tailored specifically to your needs because it's just between you and a certain party, right? And then a futures contract, because the exchange is the counterparty, it's easy to buy or sell. It's easy to buy or sell a futures contract because you are dealing with the exchange, and the exchange is always willing to buy, or is always willing to buy or to sell. When we say to buy or sell, we're not actually talking about buying or selling the underlying asset. We're talking about buying or selling in terms of the contract, in terms of entering into the contract or leaving the contract. Whereas with a forward contract, it's difficult to enter into the contract, meaning to buy, and it's difficult to exit the contract, meaning to sell. Okay. So these are some of the differences between forwards and futures, and you should be comfortable with these. They've been examined a lot. You also need to know the purpose of the derivatives market, how the derivatives market actually helps in terms of investment markets and other factors, right? So it's also a common question in exams and assignments to be asked to list the 4 purposes of the derivatives market. The derivatives market helps to provide price discovery. It also helps to facilitate risk management. It also helps in making markets more efficient, and it also helps in lowering transaction costs. So derivatives help in providing price discovery. They help in managing risk. We'll see a lot of these applications as we go on. They make markets more efficient because it's easier to enter into contracts you want to buy or sell at a given time, and they also lower transaction costs, right? And then lastly, before we look at 2 past exam questions and finish study unit 1, you also have to be familiar with the terminology of going long on a forward or futures contract and short on a futures or forward contract. When we say that you go long on a forward or futures contract, if you're the long party, right, you are the party who has agreed to buy a given asset on a given date at an agreed price, okay? So if we say you are long on a forward or futures contract, it means you're the party who has entered into the contract to buy a given asset on a given date at an agreed price, okay? Whereas if we say you are short on a forward or futures contract, it means you're the party who has agreed to sell the given asset on a given date at an agreed price. So you also need to be comfortable with the terminology long on a forward or futures contract or short on a forward or futures contract. You'll also see when we look at contingent claims, which are options, you can also go long or short on an options contract, and we'll explain what that means when we look at options and options in later chapters, right? So to just finish off, I want us to look at some past exam questions from May, June 2019. So these questions are from RSK 4805, which is the sister module to this module we're doing, like I explained to you before, but the questions overlap, So you should just be familiar with these examples that I go through. So I'll be touching on examples from both papers, right? So just don't be surprised. I just want to give you an example of some of the questions that might be asked, like some of the questions you might come across. May, June 2019, question 1.2 and 1.5. Was it actually May, June? Oh yeah, it's May, June, not January, February. It's actually May, June. I had opened January, February there. Okay, May, June. There we go. Question 1.2 and 1.5. So this, it's just an example of a question. You see, you could come across a question like this. Explain the advantages of futures and forward contracts over transactions and the actual instruments. Okay, so here we're being asked, let's say you want shares, you want to buy shares in MTN, right, in 3 months from now. Why would it be more to your advantage to use a future or forward contract rather than actually conducting your transaction in the contract today, right? So forward and futures contracts save transactional costs, right? With a forward or futures contract, rather than transacting today, you can defer your transaction into the future, and that can save you transactional costs. Forwards and futures can also be used to change portfolio allocation, but it's a bit advanced for now for this level. So what you can do, you can use forwards and futures to change the amount of money you have invested in portfolios without actually buying the assets or selling the assets in the portfolio. So that way, forwards and futures can save transactional costs, but it's a bit beyond this module for now, like for what we're talking about for now. You just need to know that they save transactional costs, but you don't have to go too much into detail. Another advantage is that forwards and futures offer flexibility as to when to buy the asset. Okay, so we're talking about this. If you want to buy an asset 3 months from now, a forward or futures contract offers you flexibility. And forwards and futures contracts also help to manage risk, right? If you want to buy an asset in the future and you're afraid that the price is going to go up, that risk can be managed and eliminated using forwards or futures, because the price at which you can buy or sell it in the future is guaranteed. Okay, so that's important. And then there was also question 1.5. Question 1.5 says, discuss the applications in which forward contracts may be preferred to futures contracts. Discuss the applications in which forward contracts may be preferred to futures contracts, right? And then here we are told forward contracts are preferred to futures contracts if we wish to enter into a tailor-made derivative contract. Remember, the advantage of forward contracts over futures contracts is that they can be tailor-made to the needs of the investor, right? Also, a futures contract might not be available for a date that we want. Remember, futures contracts are standardized, and what the day at which the exchange says they can buy or sell it to you in the future is what you have to work with, because it's standardized. And lastly, futures contract might not be available for the asset that we want. Because a futures contract is standardized, you might have to settle for a contract which is not exactly what you'll be looking for if the exchange doesn't have an alternative. Like, you might have to settle for a substitute. So in that case, you would also prefer a forward contract over a futures contract. But remember, forward contracts also carry with them the risk of default. Okay. So that brings us to an end of study unit 1, which is a very long and theoretical study unit. I hope the content I've been going through has been helpful in terms of introducing you to what derivatives are all about. So what I want you to do, I want you to go through the key points at the end of the prescribed textbook. Please go through these key points, right? And then after going through these key points, I just want you to try these questions, which are found at the back of the prescribed textbook. There are some questions like question 12, 13, 14, 15, no, 12, question 12, 13, and 15, which are a bit mathematical. I think I'll start the next class by taking you through these questions. This can be your homework. Just read up on it. And then when we look at the next class, I'll take you through those mathematical questions. But what you can do, you can try to do the theory questions here just to help you with your understanding. Okay. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this introduction to derivatives has been helpful. Please remember, you'll need to do a lot of practicing and reading for this module. It's not an easy course, but with application and hard work, you should be fine. So thank you. That brings the class to an end.